Welcome back. One administrative note is we have enabled chat today, and that's in anticipation of the question period, which will follow the 4 papers we'll begin with this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever you are. So you may already start to formulate some ideas for that open discussion period. And when we get there, you can either raise your hand using the function in Zoom or make use of the chat, and we will address those questions as they come up. But otherwise, we'll just get right back into things today. In this third session of our mini conference, we will be exploring reckoning with Orthodox involvement in the Shoah, including anti-Semitism, fascism, and direct participation in the Holocaust within Orthodox Christian nations. Starting us off is Rastko Lompar, who is a research associate at the Institute for Balkan Studies of the Serbian Academy for Sciences and Arts. He researches primarily right-wing political ideas and movements and the intersection of Christianity and nationalism in Yugoslavia. He obtained his PhD from the University of Belgrade, having defended his thesis on anti-communism in interwar Yugoslavia. His latest book, Dimitri Ljotić, Teacher or Pharisee in Serbian, 2021, examines the stances of the most important Serbian fascist politician towards Christianity and his relationship with various religious communities. So, Dr. Lompar, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I will start by sharing my screen. So I'd like to extend my deepest thanks for the invitation to talk to you today. The topic of my presentation will be the role of the Serbian Orthodox Church during the Holocaust. As you well may know, this topic has become quite controversial during the last few decades and is quite heavily debated within the public sphere. However, not much was written on the topic, and here you can see some of the examples of books that have dealt with this subject, at least partially. The majority of the authors were quite critical of the Serbian Orthodox Church and focused primarily on the contemporary situation in Serbia, so sort of the post-communist Serbia, only briefly addressing the anti-Semitic episodes from the interwar period and, interestingly, the period of the Second World War was largely glossed over and somewhat neglected in scholarship, at least in English. So today, therefore, I will talk about 3 main aspects. Sort of my presentation will have 3 time frames that will be discussed. First would be the stance of the Serbian Orthodox Church towards Jews and Nazism before the Second World War. Secondly, the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Holocaust. And lastly, and more briefly, due to the fact that it's been most thoroughly discussed, is the role of the Serbian Orthodox Church in the Holocaust remembrance denial dichotomy. I will showcase the differences between each period and argue that the process was not linear in nature as it's often presented. Also, I will show that at all times there existed a parallel impulse that, depending on the period and the context, either came forward or was suppressed. So we had episodes of really affirmative stances towards the Jews, and then some aspects of anti-Semitism occurring parallelly. Right off the bat, it is important to note that the majority of the debates regarding the Serbian Orthodox Church's role within the Holocaust revolves either around the actions or the cult of Bishop Nikolai Velimirovic, who was, as you probably already know, canonized as saint by the Serbian Orthodox Church in 2003, not without much controversy, both internally and abroad. There are several reasons for that. Firstly, he was undoubtedly the most influential and respected church figure during his tenure as Bishop of Žiča and Ohrid. He's for sure the most important Serbian cleric of the 20th century. Secondly, His criticism of Jews was long-lasting and thorough. More importantly, it was quite vocal. He was, for example, criticized by the chief rabbi Isaac Alcalay for his writings on the Jews already in 1928. So he has been battling sort of the accusations of anti-Semitism for decades. Secondly, the God devotionalist movement, which was under his tutelage, published overtly anti-Semitic texts, such as the writings of American industrialist Henry Ford. Lastly, and most nefariously, he maintained close ties to Dmitry Ljotić, the leader of the fascist movement Zbor, which was fiercely anti-Semitic. However, this relationship was much more complicated than is often presented. Here, if you allow me to shamelessly plug my own research, I would wholeheartedly recommend the edited volume, Bishop Nikolai Velimirovich, Old Controversies in Historical and Theological Context, that has been recently published by the Institute for Balkan Studies. And it deals precisely with these controversies surrounding the life and writings of Bishop Nikolai. And I have a chapter inside dissecting the anatomy of his relationship with Dmitry Ljotić. So, in addition to Bishop Nikolai Velimirovich, there were other church figures that were critical of the Jews and what they perceived as harmful Jewish influence. However, they were neither as vocal nor as important as he was. This was only strengthened, these sentiments were only strengthened by the influx of Russian emigre clergy, which was further radicalized by the civil war in Russia. The majority of the anti-Semitic statements within clerical circles during the interwar period revolved around the identification of Jews with communism. In that context, many saw Nazi Germany as a suitable protector. Here you can see, for example, that Patriarch Varnava openly praised Hitler's struggle against Bolshevism in late 1936. This statement, which did not explicitly mention Jews, however, was given much attention in the Nazi press. Here you can see that it was published even by the Völkische Beobachter and also by the Serbian Orthodox press on the left. The German side was, during the late 30s, quite enthusiastic about the possibilities of establishing deeper ties with the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Serbian Orthodox circles. It even initiated a string of scholarships for young Serbian Orthodox theologues. Here we can see a clear testament as to how convinced they were in the possibilities for having a great and fruitful cooperation with the Serbian Orthodox Church. Here we can see a quote by Bishop Theodor Heckel, the leader of the foreign service of the German Evangelical Church, who had worked hand in glove with the German foreign ministry during the late 30s. And in his letter to the newly elected Serbian Patriarch, Gavrilo Dožić, he expressed in February 1938 that he was convinced that the Serbian Orthodox churches, as no other church in the world, united with us in the struggle led by the Führer, Adolf Hitler, against the satanic enemy of mankind, Bolshevism. However, this period of grace and great relations was soon brought to an end with the eruption of the Second World War, during which the traditional ties of the Serbian elite to the Allied side, so to the French and the British circles primarily, became quite apparent. So when the Yugoslav government, which had signed the country's assent to the Axis, was overthrown in a military coup on the March 27th of March 1941, the Serbian Orthodox Church wholeheartedly supported it. The Patriarch even gave a rousing speech on the radio endorsing the coup. Here he spoke about how the Serbian nation has manifested its complete willingness to go as far as needed in order to protect its national and state interests against Hitler's tyranny. From that point on, the Serbian Orthodox Church was seen by the Germans as a hostile element within the country and as a harmful yet quite powerful influence on the Serbian population. And this dichotomy between the perceived harmfulness and the strength of the Serbian Orthodox Church will be quite apparent during the occupation as a whole through their analyses. Yugoslavia was merely invaded days after this coup had occurred, and it was promptly defeated and carved by the occupiers. Here you can see on the left a map of the division of the country. You can see how the line between Italian and German lines of influence spanned across diagonally. Just like the country, the territory of the church was divided and torn apart by the victors. Depending on the new rulers was their status. For example, in Croatia, Serbian clergy, alongside its Jewish population, were being systematically exterminated. In Hungarian and Albanian areas, the situation was less brutal, but also quite dire. Even the fellow Orthodox Bulgarian occupiers had systematically expelled and brutalized Serbian priests. Paradoxically, it was the Germans and the Italian occupiers that were the least harsh towards the Serbian clergy. In all cases, the Serbian Orthodox Church was seen as a harbinger of Serbian nationalism and therefore as an unwanted element within the newly acquired territories. As a consequence, the Church itself considered the German side and primarily the German side responsible for its mishandling at the hands of the German satellites. On the flip side, the Germans were quite wary of the influence that the Serbian Orthodox Church wielded over the Serbian population at large. Therefore, the Patriarch Gavrilo and soon after Bishop Nikolai Velimirovic were arrested and placed under house arrest in several monasteries in Serbia. They were suspected, of course not without basis, of maintaining contacts with the royalist resistance. The Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church was allowed to operate, but under strict supervision, and all statements had to be submitted to German censors before they were to be published. Both the Germans and the Serbian collaborators made significant efforts to sway the Church and force it to cooperate with the occupiers. They primarily had two things in mind. One, to openly denounce the communist resistance, and two, to call on the Serbian population to return to their houses, or in other words, to call on the Serbian population to pacify them, to stop resisting the occupation. Even though there were hardly any sympathies for communism and communists within church circles, the Serbian Orthodox Church refused to accept German demands, and it remained in a very sort of uncomfortable position of stalemate during the entire German occupation. The Patriarch and Bishop Nikolai were never released from internment. Now, on the other hand, the Holocaust was especially quickly and efficiently carried out in occupied Serbia. More than 80% of pre-war Serbian Jewry perished in the war. In some aspects, it even predated the Wannsee Conference and the establishment of the final solution. Other peculiarity regarding Holocaust in occupied Serbia is the fact that much of the killings was carried out by Wehrmacht, the regular German armed forces, in contrast to the usual practice of employing SS Einsatztruppen. The killings were exclusively done, and this is important to note, by the Germans, whereas Serbian collaborators had only minor roles, which was either, and that was most dominantly, primarily disseminating anti-Semitic propaganda, and in the case of the Serbian police, it was in helping Germans track down and apprehend Jewish prisoners. Within those events, the Serbian Orthodox Church played no role in the Holocaust. It was, however, not in the position, as already stated, by the fact that it had to submit all of its decisions to the German censors prior to their publishing. It was not in the position to raise its voice against the Holocaust. Similarly, it could do very little to stop the genocide of Serbs that was taking part in Croatia. There were, however, some examples of Serbian Orthodox priests helping save Jews, mostly Jewish children, by issuing fraudulent certificates stating that they had been christened. Dozens of Jewish children were saved that way. Most notably, Bishop Nikolai Velimirovich personally helped save Jewish mother and daughter Neuhaus and arranged for them to pose as Orthodox nuns, where they spent the majority of the war hiding in a Serbian monastery dressed as nuns. Here you see the picture of the Ella Neuhaus, who was the child and the daughter in question. And here you have links to her testimony, which is fascinating, how she was helped personally by Bishop Nikolai. Some within the church did have indirect involvement in the Holocaust, primarily those members of the clergy that belonged to the Yugoslav National Movement Zbor. They, like the movement as a whole, and this is also quite important to keep in mind, had little to do with direct persecution of the Jews, other than producing anti-Semitic propaganda. However, in doing so, they went against the explicit wishes of the Serbian Orthodox Church and openly collaborated with the Germans. As the war went on, both the Patriarch and Bishop Nikolai, who were still kept in internment in various monasteries in Serbia, having remained steadfast in rejecting German demands for cooperation, became increasingly a burden for the German occupiers. More damningly, as the communist forces and the Red Army were nearing Belgrade during late 1944, their captors became convinced that they would call on the Serbian population to fight the Germans should they be liberated. Therefore, under the personal orders of Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, they were taken to Germany. After some confusion and a brief stint in the Gestapo jail in Vienna, they would end up in Dachau concentration camp in late September 1944. They were held, of course, in a separate part of the camp alongside many other high-profile German and foreign prisoners. They were not mixed in with the general population of the camp. There was much confusion in Serbia, and practically to this day, about the nature of their captivity in Dachau. It was aided by the fact that both the Patriarch and Bishop Nikolai were perhaps intentionally quite vague about their time in Dachau. Some that are very critical of the church went as far as equating their stay with a hotel. Even though they were not ordinary prisoners, and were the fact that they were given the status of important personalities, their struggles at one of the Germany's most notorious camps should not be relativized. It seems quite unfair to portray their stay there as some sort of a hotel vacation. All in all, they were released in November 1944, having spent less than 2 months in the camp, after the German Foreign Ministry successfully petitioned for their release. Precisely inside the concentration camp did Bishop Nikolai Velimirovich allegedly author, his most controversial and anti-Semitic book called The Message to the Serbian People Through the Prison Window. According to the story, it was allegedly written on rolls of toilet paper and smuggled out of the camp. Despite living until 1956, Bishop Nikolai never published the book himself. It was only done in the mid-80s, 1980s, posthumously. Almost immediately, concerns were raised about the work's authenticity, although the majority now considers it to be at least in large proportions, an authentic work by Bishop Nikolai. In it, he placed the blame for the hardships of the Serbian people during during the Second World War, on their drifting away from God and the dangerous effects of secularization, etc., and the fact that the Serbians had, according to his writings, accepted many false idols from the secular Europe and the secular West, which is the common trope within his writings at that time. His view, however, Europe was in fact controlled by the Jews. And here comes one of the most quoted anti-Semitic passages from the book. He wrote, "Europe knows nothing other than what the Jews present as knowledge. She does not believe in anything other than what the Jews command. She knows no value until the Jews take out their scales. All modern European slogans were created by the Jews that crucified Christ. Democracy, strikes, socialism, atheism, religious tolerance, pacifism, permanent revolution, capitalism, and communism. All of them are Jewish inventions and their father, the devil." Some within the church have attempted to explain this away as classic Christian anti-Judaism because of the nods towards some quotes from the scriptures. However, in this case, it seems hard to disregard the clear modern anti-Semitic tropes about a Jewish conspiracy. All in all, whilst acknowledging concerns about the work's authenticity, this book remains the most radical example of anti-Semitism within clerical circles at that time. So, in speaking broadly, what is the role of the Serbian Orthodox Church in the narrative surrounding Holocaust in contemporary Serbia? Those authors I mentioned at the beginning of my talk did, I think, quite an admirable job at cataloging all the instances of anti-Semitism within clerical circles. However, in addition, and this is something I think that has not been adequately put forward, there were attempts made by the church, and more specifically by the Jasenovec Committee of the Serbian Orthodox Church, which deals primarily with the remembrance of the most notorious concentration and extermination camp in Croatia called Jasenovac, to help establish memorials to the Holocaust victims as well. Therefore, the official stance of the Serbian Orthodox Church towards the Holocaust remains unchanged. The Church has stressed at numerous occasions that the Jewish and Serbian people suffered greatly at the hands of the same perpetrators and often in the same camps, for example, in Jasenovac. So, in conclusion, the main takeaway from my brief presentation today is the fact that the Serbian Orthodox Church had no direct or indirect involvement in the Holocaust, and that in fact it suffered greatly as well during the Nazi occupation of Serbia. There were, of course, instances of anti-Semitism, but never an attempt to aid in the destruction of the Jews. Even Bishop Nikolai Velimirovic, who is usually seen as the most important anti-Semite, helped save a Jewish family during the Holocaust, as evidenced by their testimony. This shows, in my opinion, that anti-Semitism was never a rampant problem within the Serbian Orthodox Church. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Ionut Biliuta on the case of the Church of Romania. Dr. Biliuta is a researcher with the Romanian Academy. His main academic interests are the history of the Orthodox Church in the 20th century, with a particular emphasis on the Romanian and Greek Orthodox churches, the Holocaust and the Romanian Orthodox Church, anti-Semitism and racism in modern Orthodox theology, fascism in Orthodox clergymen, transferability of various languages of knowledge between Western and Eastern Europe in the late 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. Dr. Biliuta.
I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. What I'm aiming to do today is go beyond this kind of black and white narrative about the Orthodox Church and the Holocaust. This kind of, I would say, self-sufficient categories of perpetrator versus savior, and show that actually the whole picture, at least in the Romanian case, was more diverse, and it fluctuated sometimes between contradictory terms. So the structure of what I'm planning to do today, I'm trying to basically to speak about two main case studies. In the first section, after I will provide you with some context, because I'm pretty sure that you don't know much about Romania and its participation in the Holocaust, I will try to present you some instances and individual cases of Orthodox clergymen who killed, robbed, and sexually abused the Jews during the Holocaust, especially in Transnistria. And for the second largest part of my presentation, I will also speak just a bit through two individual cases about those clergymen and theologians who actually chose to save Jews during the Romanian Holocaust and why they did that. So with thus saying, I will move now to the first part of my presentation, just providing you with a bit of context of what was Transnistria, why it is relevant, and why this whole region became an actual killing site during the Romanian Holocaust. On 22nd of June 1941, along with the German allies, Romanian troops crossed the Prut River into the Soviet Union in their country's effort to recapture the territories of Bessarabia and Bukovina. The Romanian and German forces swept through the Soviet defenses and on August the 10th reached the river Bug. The Romanian-German Tighina Convention assigned the territory between the Dniester and the Bug, the so-called Transnistria, as a territorial prize for the Romanian government to exploit and eventually settle. Envisaged by the Germans to appease Romania's wounded pride after the painful cession of northwestern Transylvania to Hungary in August 1940, General Antonescu's government refrained from fully integrating Transnistria, in part because the leader thought that it would constitute a tacit acknowledgement of the cession of the Transylvanian territory. In Transnistria, a new body of missionary clergymen was to provide religious assistance to the Orthodox population, regardless of its ethnicity. At first, an Orthodox mission was created, which had pastoral duties, and these duties were carried by frontline Orthodox priests serving as officers in the Romanian army or regimental chaplains from combat units pursuing the retreating Red Army. At the behest of the Romanian authorities, in 1941, more precisely 15th of August, an Orthodox mission was established, and it was followed in 1942 through a process of institutional reorganization, with Holy Synod in Bucharest officially incorporating the territory of Transnistria into its canonical structure as an exarchy. Here you have the territory of Transnistria with its counties and the geographical area as an exarchate under Metropolitan Vissarion Puiu. Several questions arise. Was this story an isolated episode in the life of the Orthodox Church, meaning the participation in the Holocaust? Was the involvement of the Romanian Orthodox clergy in the Holocaust individual? Was it a manifestation of the radicalization of the church throughout Romania? Or was it emblematic of Christian churches in all Eastern European fascist states? The Orthodox mission from Transnistria canonically depended on the Romanian Patriarchal See in Bucharest. It was shaped as a mission rather than a bishopric, under the assumption that the atheist communists had destroyed the Russian Orthodox Church there. The main architect of the Russian mission, Archimandrite Iulius Scriban, he was a brilliant theologian, felt that Transnistria had to be re-evangelized, welcomed the conflict with the Soviet Union as a holy war and an ideal opportunity to recover the eastern provinces lost in 1940, Romanian Orthodox hierarchs, priests, monks, and seminarians seized the opportunity. An immediate aim was to vilify the Jews in the press and sermons. During their first contact with the population in Bessarabia and Transnistria, the Orthodox clergy behaved according to the anti-Semitic tenets of their state and church. Here was their opportunity to act according to their belief that Judaism was, and I quote, a satanic religion, I end the quote, and that Bolshevism had been engendered by the Jews to undermine European Christian civilizations. Orthodox clergymen depicted their new Jewish neighbors as perpetrators, or at least middlemen, in the Bolshevik assault on religion and the destruction or conversion of churches and monasteries on the Soviet territories into factories, cinemas, or barns. Priests and theology students in the mission and the Romanian army contributed as perpetrators of, or by enabling bystanders to take part in, the murder of Jews in the ghettos that Romania established in Bessarabia or near the Bug River in Transnistria. Following in the footsteps of Diana Dumitru, I argue that the genocidal disposition among some Romanian Orthodox Church clergy reflected the interwar anti-Semitic indoctrination by fascist and anti-Semitic parties and movements, such as the ill-famed Iron Guard and the National Christian Defense League. Many members of the church fell under the spell of right-wing mobilization as anti-Semitism became an idiom for near all social and political discontent. During the Second World War, fascist priests collaborated with the military to foster violence against Bolshevik Jews. To them, the policies and practices of the Romanian administration in Transnistria suggested state endorsement of violence, thievery, and rape, and an opportunity for fascists to prove their allegiance to the state. Violent pogroms occurred once Romanian troops arrived in Bessarabia in northern Bukovina. Upon the arrival in Transnistria of Jews deported from northern Bukovina, Bessarabia, and some parts of Old Kingdom Romania, the missionaries continued to paint these former neighbors as, I quote, offsprings of Satan and most likely Bolsheviks. Missionary newspapers continued to feature front pages about the recent persecution of the Orthodox Church in Soviet territories, scapegoating both the local Jews and the recently arrived deportees and as, and I quote, enemies of our faith and the friends of Bolsheviks, I end the quote, which went in hand with the nationalization of Transnistria, presenting its benefits to the ethnic Romanian population in almost colonial tone. Following the genocidal policies of the new administration, Romanian clergymen dressed up ethnic cleansing of the Jewish population and suppression of neo-Protestant groups like the Baptists, Innocentists, and Adventists as God-ordained mandates. Metropolitan Vissarion Puiu of the Transnistrian Exarchate, he was also a reputed clergyman and theologian, reportedly confidentially to the Synod in Bucharest his vision of their common mission in Transnistria. The conquest of a nation begins with weapons, continues with its assignment of administrators, to be completed later with its complete conversion. We don't know what conversion really means here. The second important point of the mandate given to me in Transnistria was the systematization of social life, a necessary action requiring two immediate steps, an urgent, sometimes surgical one falling in the hands of civil administration and the army, and the other of constant spiritual renewal through the Orthodox Church and school. I end the quote. Puiu was aware that the surgical policies of the civil administration and the army would have to precede the spiritual renewal. Nevertheless, by ascribing, albeit implicitly, the killing of the Jews solely to the state authorities, Puiu's official correspondence painted over the participation of any of his clergy in murder and robbery. His silence protected not just friends like Antim Nica, but others irrespective of any relationship. To this day, official Orthodox Church historiography leaves out the brutal behavior even of the army, let alone the clergy in Transnistria. Competing with indigenous ethnic German population to rob the Jews, the Romanian army and civil administration easily prevailed. Following in their footsteps, Orthodox clergy deployed into Transnistria embarked on a large-scale blackmail, demanding bribes from deported and local Jews under the threat that they might be deported further east across the Bug into German hands. They offered food and other necessities in return for jewelry, clothing, money, antiques, and other valuables. Some promised exemption from forced labor if Jewish communities turned over massive quantities of cash and other valuables to the missionaries, parish priests, and their families. Behaving as feudal lords, exploiting their Jewish and Ukrainian serfs, Metropolitan Puyu and the priests around Archimandrite Nika, by the way, he has a beautiful CV, as you can see, developed into a virtual first estate, intent on expanding their wealth and influence over Transnistria. The priest Andrei Nikov, who became with Nika's support Dean of Odessa, worked with a clique that included his brother Antim Nika and their friends, hieromonk Varlam Chiriță, at that time the abbot of Bershad Monastery, and hieromonk Antim Tabacu, abbot of Osipovka Monastery and spiritual superior of all Romanian Orthodox monasteries in Transnistria. Archimandrite Nika, for example, accumulated considerable wealth by trafficking gold watches and other readily funded valuables stolen from the Jews, precious icons lifted from the Ukrainian Orthodox churches, and the large mass of the majority Ukrainian population. Members of these groups voluntarily handed property to the ecclesiastical and other authorities as gifts in return for favors and dispensations. Looting local Jewish communities included conscription of Jewish men for forced labor on behalf of the Transnistrian Exarchate, service rendered possible by Antonescu's November 11, 1941, Directive number 23 to the government of Transnistria, which permitted the employment of the deported Jews at public or agricultural works. Archival records reveal that Archimandrite Nika, hieromonks Antim Tabacu and Varlam Chiriță, and many other monks and priests deployed in Transnistria used Jewish forced labor to rebuild or refurbish churches and monasteries destroyed or damaged by the communists or the war. Russian Orthodox clergy took advantage of Jewish women as well. The sexual abuse, the latter in its various forms during the Holocaust, rape, prostitution, negotiated sex, has come under sustained study only recently. As in Bukovina and Basarabia before, married priests in Transnistria sexually exploited Jewish women. Despite vows of chastity in the case of the monks and fidelity to their wives in the case of the lay priests, Romanian Orthodox clerics took advantage of vulnerable wives and daughters of Jewish forced laborers, or in some cases made Jewish women concubines in exchange for exempting husbands from forced labor, or in return for vitals such as food, medicines, or clothing. As sex for survival, this sick time belongs to Anne Waxman, offered Jewish women one means to increase theirs or their family's chance for survival. Aside from any ideological justification, the scandalous behavior of some Orthodox clergymen in Transnistria received a powerful incentive from the central authorities of the state. According to a report of the Romanian Gendarmerie, signed by its head, General Vasiliu, and the other Colonel Tobescu, and addressed to the Holy Synod in Bucharest, the immorality of the priests was also in part the result of the government stipulation that all missionaries to Transnistria had to go without their wives and families. Paulin Leca, at that time a novice, recalled in his post-war memoirs the advice he received from Hieroman Gurie, the parish priest of the church in the village of Păsățelu, upon arrival in Transnistria. Learning of the young man's plan to become a monk, the priest advised him to take a Jewish concubine, reassuring him that this would be permissible and not be a sin since she was not baptized. Indeed, although several Jewish women offered their services in return for money and food, Brother Paul passed, opening himself to the public ridicule of the priest, which perhaps suggests how normal the practice may have been. While scholars have convincingly portrayed Romanian Orthodox clergymen as Holocaust perpetrators, they have made little effort to examine the efforts of ordinary clergymen in the rescue of the Jews. The reasons for this are varied. Most significant is the lack of access to the Romanian Orthodox Church archives, coupled with the Church's refusal to face responsibility for its nefarious actions against Jews, especially those committed in Transnistria. Rather than establishing a typology, a far-fetched typology of the Orthodox rescuer, this section of my presentation discusses what motives drove Orthodox priests, in direct contradiction to the state's official anti-Semitism, to stand up for Jews in numerous ways. For example, by preaching positively about the Jews, providing Baptist certificates, real or fake ones, supplying Jews with necessities, or serving as couriers. The Orthodox clergy who resisted the state's anti-Semitic policies were a minority among the priests of the Romanian Orthodox Church. Given that some top representatives of the hierarchy were complicit in the persecution of the Jews, these clergymen acted alone and not as part of a plan sanctioned by church superiors. Although contested, disregarded, or incriminated during and after the Holocaust, their moral choices and actions revealed that resistance was possible. They opted to engage in resistance, yet most of them harbored radical ethno-nationalist views and supported the anti-Semitic Iron Guard and the extremist National Christian Party. In them, ethno-nationalism and anti-Semitism coexisted with the Christian command to love thy neighbor. One must ask, how did such sympathies arise? And did the clergy act on their sympathies because of the Christian teaching of universal love, or some other theological principle? Or were other cultural and contextual factors at play? One of the most undervalued factors in the case of the Romanian Orthodox clergymen was the importance of theological education received during the interwar period. While most of the faculty held deeply entrenched anti-Semitic and ultra-nationalist sympathies, in the interwar years, some clergymen rejected such views. Several prominent theologians and professors publicly voiced their concerns about the increasing spread of anti-Semitism in universities and in Romanian society more generally. Although Romanian fascists, including many clergymen, despised these professors, scholars such as Gala Galaction did have supporters among his students and fellow priests. For example, Father Teodor Petcu, a priest from Basarabia, Father Atanasie Negoiță, an Old Testament scholar and Gala Galaction's personal friend, and Hieromonk Paul Paulin Leca, already mentioned, a young theology student from Chișinău, embraced Galaction's stance on the Jews. In his post-war recollection, Leca claims that he had refused to participate in the abuse of Jewish women and to force their husbands to build churches or monasteries while serving as a monastic novice and Russian translator within the Romanian Orthodox Exarchate in Transnistria because of the discussions he had previously with Moshul, the old man, the nickname of Gala Galaction among his students. Some priests did succeed in assisting Jews by issuing them real or fake Baptist certificates. This practice was a sensitive issue in the Orthodox Church. Many priests saw it as part of their broader effort to convert people to the Orthodox faith in territories where atheist Bolshevism has supposedly uprooted Christianity. Yet priests initially were uncertain whether their church and the government would permit them to baptize former communists and Jews in the newly claimed territories, so they approached the Romanian Ministry of Religious Denominations and the Patriarchy of the Orthodox Church seeking clarification. While Orthodox clergy took this step, other religious groups such as Baptists and Seventh-day Adventists provided Jews with baptismal certificates that attested to their receipt of the sacrament before the Second World War began. In March 1941, the Romanian government issued Decree number 711, declaring all Baptist certificates issued after 21st of March 1941 invalid. Despite this decree, Romanian clergy continued to baptize individuals and to issue Baptist certificates, while other priests refused. In October 1941, for example, Father Iordăchescu, initially a parish priest at St. Mary Church in Craiova in southern Romania, and afterwards at Miron Cristea Church in Bucharest, provided a Baptist certificate to Rahil Goldberg, a seamstress by trade. It appears that action saved Goldberg from imprisonment and deportation by the local military authorities in Bessarabia and afterwards possibly into Transnistria. A relevant case is that of Metropolitan of Bucovina, Tit Simedrea, and that of theologian and painter Gheorghe Rusu. Rusu was hired as a counselor to the Metropolitan See of Bucovina during Tit Simedrea. In the first day of October 1941, the Romanian military authorities in Cernăuți, confined the Jewish population in a ghetto in preparation for their deportation to Transnistria. On 10 October, the mayor of Cernăuți, Traian Popovici, already acknowledged as a righteous among nations, a lawyer and the son of an Orthodox priest, protested without success to General Corneliu Calotescu, the governor of Bucovina, against the arbitrary decision. 2 days later, Popovici appealed directly to General Antonescu. As a result, Antonescu exempted 20,000 Jews and their family members from the list of deportees. He considered these Jews indispensable economical experts working in industries important for the Romanian military, such as heavy industry, railways, communications, and textiles. Because the military authorities considered artists and liberal professions unnecessary for the war effort, David Schlachman, a printer, escaped from the ghetto and asked his friend Rusu to intercede with Metropolitan Simedrea to obtain a pass for him and his family so they could avoid deportation. Metropolitan Simedrea approached Governor Calotescu for a pass, but he was refused. Then Metropolitan Simedrea suggested that Rusu asked Mayor Popovici to issue the pass. Within a few days, Rusu had obtained the pass from Popovici. In June 1942, the state began investigating the activities of Mayor Popovici, which ultimately led to his removal from office. After that, the Romanian authorities resumed deporting Jews to Transnistria. David Schlachman now appealed to his friend Rusu to hide him, his wife Aida, and their 2 children, Meir and Beatrice. Rusu sought help from Metropolitan Simedrea, who agreed to hide the Schlachman family in his residence in Cernăuți. Simedrea was taking a serious risk, for he knew that hiding Jews was punishable by death. The Orthodox prelate even threatened the Ukrainian policemen guarding his residence with excommunication should they denounce the presence of the Schlachman family in the metropolitan premises to the Romanian authorities. These cases show clergymen directly assisting Jews. While their motivations are not always clear, their actions reveal that they were willing to run afoul of state authorities to do so. Sometimes they agreed to assist Jews they knew personally. Other times, the clergymen appear to have been motivated by the possibility of converting Jews to the Orthodox faith, even though in doing so, they risked persecution by the state. In their minds, they were offering Jews salvation through the sacrament of baptism, while also indirectly providing them with a means to avoid persecution, deportation, or death at the hands of the state. And instead of final remarks, I would say that for the Orthodox perpetrators, it is obvious the presence of a certain cognitive dissonance. In the same time, they are theologically progressive and strive for the right things. In terms of politics, they tend to be conservative, fascist, extremely anti-Semitic. And that's why I'm stating that theology and theological ideas, especially during the Holocaust, for the Romanian case, went silent. Also, another thing that should be underlined is the importance of biblical study and that of Jewish language in the act of salvation. What we can see in the Romanian case is that biblical scholars played a tremendous role in instilling into their students the importance of the Jewish life. At the same time, at the same theological cognitive dissonance, the same theological cognitive dissonance we encounter in the case of saviors. They were fascists during the interwars years, but in the same time, while harboring these ideas, they choose to save on an individual basis. They choose to save Jews during the Holocaust. And last but not least, going beyond the reason why Orthodox clergymen killed and robbed Jews, and here we have potential explanations provided by history, anthropology, sociology, psychology, so on and so forth. We should explore the possibility for an ecumenical post-Holocaust Orthodox theology focused on the nature of human evil, identifying ways of exorcising contemporary anti-Semitism from Christian communities, and to profess a shared investigation of God's plans, both for Jews and Gentiles. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nikos Kouremenos on the subject of Between the Cross and the Swastika, Orthodox Bishops, Mount Athos, and Nazi-occupied Greece. Kouremenos is theologian and church historian. He earned his PhD from the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome and has taught at the University of Athens, the University of Thessaly, and has served as a visiting professor at the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt in Germany. Currently, he is research associate at the Volos Academy for Theological Studies. His co-edited volume, Nationalism and Ecumenical Orthodoxy with Dimitrios Kouremenos, was published in 2021.
Hi to everyone. Thank you very much for this introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation, for which I feel very honored. The Nazi occupation of Greece from 41 to 44 brought with it immense hardship, national humiliation, and unraveling of social cohesion. Among the darkest chapters of this period was the fate of the country's Jewish population. From Thessaloniki to Ioannina and from Athens to Corfu, centuries-old Jewish communities were uprooted, deported, and exterminated. More than 80% of Greece's Jews perished, one of the highest percentages of Jewish annihilation in all of Europe. In this context of occupation and moral collapse, the role of the Greek Orthodox Church, and particularly its leaders, invites close scrutiny. How did it respond to the unfolding genocide? Did it offer protection, or did it retreat into caution and silence? This presentation explores two contrasting ecclesial responses to the Nazi regime: the courageous interventions of a few Orthodox bishops who protected Jews at great personal and institutional risk, and the more passive, politically cautious stance of the monastic republic of Mount Athos. The title of the presentation, Between the Cross and the Swastika, evokes the stark moral and spiritual tensions facing the Church during this period. The cross symbolizes the Christian call to sacrificial love, justice, and solidarity with the vulnerable, qualities that certain bishops embodied with remarkable conviction. In contrast, the swastika evokes the terror of totalitarianism, racial ideology, and the pressures it exerted on religious institutions to conform, flatter, or simply remain silent. At the heart of this study is Archbishop Damaskinos of Athens, who mobilized clergy, coordinated with diplomats and Jewish leaders, and publicly protested the deportation, an act almost unparalleled among religious leaders in occupied Europe. Equally notable is Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Zakynthos, who, along with Mayor Lucas Carrer, refused to hand over the island's Jewish population and ensured their survival. These figures represent the best of Orthodox leadership in times of crisis, theologically grounded, pastorally courageous, and morally lucid. By contrast, Mount Athos, while untouched by direct persecution, adopted a posture of political accommodation. Monks addressed letters of loyalty to Hitler, cooperated with Nazi cultural expeditions, and nurtured illusions of a protectorate status under the Third Reich. Though motivated in part by fear and isolation, the Holy Mountain's silence amid the Shoah reveals a troubling distance from the suffering beyond its borders. By placing these two responses in dialogue, this presentation seeks not to judge simplistically, but to trace the boundaries of witness and complicity. It invites reflection on what faithfulness demanded in 1943 and what it still demands today. And now we're dealing with the first section of the presentation with the title The Cross, Orthodox Bishops and the Protection of Jews. During the Nazi occupation of Greece from 41 to 44, institutions across the country faced a moral reckoning. Some aligned with or accommodating with the regime, others withdrew in silence, and a few stood in resistance. Within the Church of Greece, a number of bishops chose a path that defied the atmosphere of fear and conformity. Their actions were neither systematic nor institutionally mandated, but they remain enduring examples of ecclesiastical courage in the face of genocide. Foremost among them was Archbishop Damaskinos of Athens, who succeeded Chrysanthos Philippidis as primate of the church in 1941. From the outset of his tenure, Damaskinos exhibited a careful but firm opposition to Axis policies, walking in a difficult line between preserving the church's institutional stability and responding to the occupation's moral crisis. His most notable action came in March 43 during the deportations of Jews from Thessaloniki. In response, Damaskinos drafted and orchestrated a collective letter of protest signed by prominent figures of Greek society. Though the church was not named directly, likely to shield it from retaliation, this initiative marked one of the very few public condemnations of the Nazi racial policies issued by a major Christian leader in occupied Europe. Damaskinos also worked discreetly to facilitate rescue efforts. He encouraged priests to issue false baptismal certificates to Jews, which served as protective cover against deportation. In close collaboration with Chief Rabbi of Athens, Elias Barzilai, and with the support of foreign diplomats, most notably the Spanish consul Sebastián Romero Radigales, he helped coordinate a complex network of safe houses, forged identities, and hidden escape routes throughout Athens and its suburbs. In addition to spiritual authority, Damaskinos wielded moral credibility and a symbolic national role, which he used with remarkable efficacy. In one of the most well-known anecdotes, when Nazi authorities threatened to execute him for his protests, Damaskinos reportedly replied, I quote, "The clergy of Greece are not shot, they are hanged. I beg you to respect this tradition." End of quotation. The remark, steeped in irony and defiance, drew from a national memory associated with Pavlos Melas, a hero of the Macedonian struggle some decades ago. It also underscored the Archbishop's willingness to stake his life and office in defense of persecuted fellow citizens. An equally striking example is Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Zakynthos. In September 1943, following Italy's armistice and the German takeover of the Ionian Islands, local Nazi commanders demanded a list of the island's Jewish residents. Chrysostomos, alongside Mayor Lucas Carrer, famously handed over a list containing only 2 names, their own. The accompanying letter, "The Jews of Zakynthos are under my personal responsibility. If you wish to arrest them, you must arrest me first," is now legendary. Unlike other regions of Greece, where Jewish communities were rounded up and sent to their deaths, all 275 Jews of the island of Zakynthos survived the war, hidden in Christian homes with the support of local clergy and lay people. After the war, both Chrysostomos and Carrer were honored by the institution Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, a rare distinction for Orthodox clergy. Beyond these 2 towering figures, several other hierarchs took decisive, if quieter, steps to aid Jews. Metropolitan Joachim of Demetrias in Volos reportedly helped forge identity documents and settled Jews in ecclesiastical properties, including monasteries and private homes. In Chalkida, Bishop Gregorios actively intervened to prevent deportation and secured hiding place with the help of local clergy. In Larissa and even in some other rural dioceses, scattered efforts were made to protect Jewish individuals, particularly children, through the use of false Christian identities. It is important to emphasize that these actions were not part of an organized church policy. According to Panteleimon Anastasakis, a contemporary scholar who wrote this book, the Holy Synod of the Church of Greece refrained from issuing any collective statement condemning the deportations or broader racial policies of the Nazi regime. This silence, motivated in part by fear of reprisal and in part by pre-existing religious boundaries between Jews and Orthodox Christians, meant that these bishops, the previous examples I mentioned, acted largely in isolation, often without institutional cover. And yet, these exceptions are profoundly instructive. They challenge the image of total ecclesial passivity and complicity. What distinguished these bishops was not access to special information or political power, but their capacity to see the Jewish population not as outsiders, but as human beings created in the image of God. This theological vision, rooted in Orthodox anthropology, motivated them to act even at the risk of arrest or martyrdom. Some of them had personal ties with local Jewish families, strengthened through coexistence in mixed communities over generations. But beyond social familiarity, their responses seem animated by a pastoral conscience that could not remain silent. Stephen Bauman, another contemporary scholar, who wrote a book, The Agony of, with the name The Agony of the Greek Jews, notes that the Archbishop Damaskinos, in particular, understood his office not simply as an ecclesial title, but as a guardian of the nation's soul, responsible for protecting all its members, Orthodox or not. Their actions also stand in contrast to those hierarchs who choose inaction or prioritized institutional survival. The broader Church of Greece adopted a cautious stance. In regions outside Athens, bishops either remained silent or failed to intervene as Jews were deported. Some were indifferent, and others may have harbored the anti-Semitic attitudes widespread in Greek society during the interwar period. This reality renders the examples of resistance all the more striking. Ultimately, these bishops remind us that spiritual leadership is most credible when it risks itself for the sake of the vulnerable. Their legacy is not only historical, but theological, an insistence that orthodoxy, at its best, bears witness not only in liturgy and asceticism, but in the defense of life. In the midst of darkness, their voices and actions offered a flicker of light. And now the second part of the presentation, the swastika, Mount Athos, and the Nazi occupation. In contrast to the courageous resistance shown by a few Orthodox bishops, the stance of Mount Athos during the Nazi occupations present a more ambiguous and uncomfortable chapter in Greek Orthodox history. Far from being heroic, the dominant attitude of the Athonite community was one of passive accommodation, political naivete, and in some cases, opportunism. When German forces entered Thessaloniki in April 41, the Holy Community of Athos, representing all 20 monasteries, sent a formal letter to Adolf Hitler, asking him to become protector of the Holy Mountain. The letter invoked historical precedents, appealing to Hitler as the successor of the Byzantine emperors and as guardian of Orthodox monasticism. The language used was not only deferential, but imbued with admiration for the Nazi leader and his supposed role in preserving spiritual civilization. This initiative was not an isolated act. In the months that followed, non-Greek monasteries, including the Russian San Panteleimon, the Bulgarian Geographu, and some Romanian Skites, Prodromou and Lakou, all these communities sent separate petitions to Nazi authorities decrying their marginalization under Greek governance and invoking the Treaty of Berlin of 1878 to request that the Axis powers appoint their own representative to Athos. These appeals reflected not only historical grievances, but also a desire to re-establish a multi-ethnic Athonite model under German auspices, bypassing Greek state control. Although Hitler formally refused to accept the protectorate, insisting the matter be referred to the Greek collaborationist government in Athens, many Athonite monks believed or claimed that the Führer had assumed this role. The presence of German troops, the delivery of food via the Red Cross in Bulgaria, and the courteous reception of German officers at the mountain all helped sustain this illusion. German officials, in turn, exploited this readiness to accommodate. In July 41, the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, a Nazi cultural looting task force, dispatched a Byzantinological expedition to Mount Athos, led by Professor Franz Dölger. The group photographed over 3,000 documents, icons, and manuscripts, and published the finding in a 1943 volume titled Münchland Athos, funded by the Nazi Party. Dölger's diary reveals that monks generally welcomed the delegation, offered generous hospitality, and in some cases displayed Nazi symbols, including portraits of Hitler, swastika flags, and expressions like Heil Hitler. This cordiality cannot be dismissed as mere protocol. At Hillandan Monastery, the swastika was raised. In Constantinople, a charcoal portrait of Hitler was proudly displayed in the guest hall. At Vatopedi, monks referred to Hitler as our protector. These were not isolated anomalies, but part of a broader pattern of deference rooted in political anxiety, ethnic divisions, and a theological worldview oriented toward imperial patronage. Of course, this behavior must be seen within the constraints of war and information control. The monks had limited access to external news, and the illusion of protection may have seemed pragmatic. Nonetheless, this posture stands in stark contrast to the prophetic witness offered by figures like Damaskinos and Chrysostomos. It is crucial to state Mount Athos did not participate in the Shoah, or did it play an active role in persecuting Jews, but neither did its south. Its silence was not one of resistance, of caution and cultural in the expedition, the Athonite leadership made itself complicit, however passively, in the ideological and symbolic agenda of the Nazi regime. To be fair, not all monks approved of this posture. There is no evidence of theological justification for Nazism in official Athonite documents, and many monks may have simply conformed under pressure or misunderstanding. Still, this institutional voice of Athos during this time was marked by passivity, political accommodation, and the failure of discernment. In retrospect, the so-called Nazi protectorate was an illusion, not formally accepted by Hitler, not legally recognized by the German military, and not enforced on the ground. But it was an illusion willingly embraced by some monastic circles, nurtured by nostalgia for Byzantine imperialism and resentment toward the modern Greek state, willingly. The Athos becomes political withdrawal, and when the church theology of empire is manipulated by new forms of authoritarianism. The stories of Damaskinos, Chrysostomos, and their peers reveal how pastoral courage can disrupt systems of fear and hate. Their legacy speaks not only to the past, but to the ethical horizon of orthodoxy, itself. A church that dares to protect, to risk, and to act. In contrast, Mount Athos reminds us that silence, even when born of spiritual detachment, can carry ethical consequences. The Holy Mountain's posture during the occupation, marked by deference and self-preservation, reflects the danger of theology divorced from moral responsibility. Together, these two responses frame the limits and possibilities of Orthodox witness under pressure. Between the cross and the swastika, between the call to shepherd and the instinct to retreat, lies a question that still confronts religious leadership today. What does faith demand when power becomes tyranny? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We're shortly going to move into our open panel discussion, but to kind of kickstart that part of our program, we're welcoming Father Filotheos Maroudas, who will speak to us about the Holocaust in the context of interreligious dialogue. Father Filotheos holds a Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Strasbourg. He is head of the second Greek unit of the International Chair of Bioethics, and he's a priest of the Greek Orthodox community of Dortmund-Bochum in Germany under the Omophorion of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. He actively participates as a member in interconfessional, interfaith, and academic schemes that aim at the creative coexistence of diverse traditions and philosophies. So welcome, Father Filotheos.
Thank you, Father Rudy. I present the theme about the Holocaust in the context of the interreligious dialogue. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in an era marked by resurging antisemitism, deepening polarization, and growing distrust between religious and cultural communities, the need for meaningful interreligious engagement is no longer a theoretical concern, it is a humanitarian and ethical necessity. The tragic echoes of the past seem closer than ever, and the memory of the Holocaust emerges not only as a historical reference point, but as a moral compass. It is in this fragile global context that the present reflection seeks to contribute. My presentation aims to highlight the importance of establishing an auxiliary peace-building pillar between states and religions, one that can serve both as guardian of the ethical legacy of the Holocaust and as a powerful bulwark against antisemitism in times of political tension, such as those we face today in the religious dialogue. Humanity watches with deep concern the events unfolding in the Gaza Strip. The unprovoked terrorist attack of October 7th and the horrific events that accompanied it, including mass killings of civilians, abductions, rapes, and violence against innocent citizens on Israeli soil, shocked the international community. The political decisions that followed, aimed at protecting the abductees, the consequent restoration of security, and the neutralization of existing terrorist threats, have been presented in such a way by various information centers and media outlets in order to provoke and rekindle worldwide anti-Semitic sentiment. In the difficult circumstances we are experiencing, it may not be appropriate, just, or beneficial in the long term to collectively identify and direct peoples with the political decisions of the leadership representing them, especially when these decisions are made during wartime situations and include acts by terrorist organizations with invisible support. Such a generalization would amount to an unfair and simplistic reading of reality, which exacerbates differences between peoples and political leaderships, with an impact on religions. It also prevents the building of relationships which, regardless of the current political climate, can continue based on independent interreligious dialogue, understanding, and respect for our centuries-old common traditions. In this dramatically charged landscape, where political leaderships broadly prove often inadequate in addressing such profound and complex crises and managing the collateral damages they create, such as antisemitism and the devaluation of the Holocaust ethical legacy, I believe that the need for independent interreligious dialogue becomes more imperative than ever. Today, we are called to utilize a cross-cultural approach that current circumstances render tragically relevant. The Holocaust and its significance as a constant within interreligious dialogue. As has been extensively demonstrated in my previous study, the Holocaust, the genocide of European Jews, remain not only a historical event, but a critical turning point in humanity's journey. It prompted a redefinition of our moral values and change the way we perceive human dignity, rights, and interreligious relations. Education often tends to approach the Holocaust exclusively through modern Jewish and European political history, overlooking its deeper pedagogical and religious significance. Recently, however, a new reflection has begun that presents the Holocaust as a starting point for broader contemplation on contemporary issues such as human rights and bioethics. Contemporary education is now called upon to highlight the interreligious and intercultural dimension of the Holocaust, as this contributes to enhancing empathy and meaningful dialogue in multicultural societies. The proposal made through this presentation is for the Orthodox Christian Church to undertake an interreligious initiative for, for the interreligious approach of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity on ethical and bioethical issues based on the values derived from the Holocaust. In this dialogical effort, the specific contribution of the Orthodox Church acquires particular gravity. It does not share the same past as the Roman Catholic and the Protestant churches, which, while they have engaged in institutional dialogue with Judaism since 1965, did so because of the manifest, systematic, and tragically guilty stains of both confessions towards Jews in the past, culminating in the Holocaust, which has carried out by their members. It is true that institutionally, the Orthodox Church has not adopted the trend commonly known as theology after Auschwitz or after the Holocaust. Its administrative structure, built on a representational democratic basis, nevertheless gives it in the flexibility to move nimbly in such initiatives, and the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople represents a constant factor in promoting interreligious dialogue with ongoing and consistent commitment. Furthermore, the Orthodox Church is the confession within Christianity that, as it dares to reflect with sincerity and self-critical disposition on its stance towards historical events, recognizing any silences or omissions of the past, can, without historical guilt, lead the dialogue beyond the historical political framework, which until now is still often set and becomes an impediment and guided to the common ethical principles stemming from the common transcendental source of truth, the God of Abraham. The Holocaust, therefore, constitutes a unique vehicle for this transcendence. It possesses historicity with unique characteristics. It is the most recent event with extensively documented testimonies and visual records, but it also intertwines all three religions for which its legacy and lessons are equally acceptable. At this point, I must clarify that while the main drama of the Holocaust unfolded in Christian countries, some Islamic ones had been active allies of Nazi Germany, which they supported, and in this respect, we share a common responsibility. This self-awareness and flexibility of the Orthodox Church, as well as in their rapid historical presence and in the sensitive territories where the three monotheistic religions meet, enhances its credibility in contemporary religious dialogue and makes it capable of taking initiatives to support channels of interreligious dialogue between Judaism and Islam, contributing to and aiming at preserving the moral lessons derived from the memory of the Holocaust. It is not enough to commemorate the Holocaust, but a legitimate goal is to elevate it with internal benefit for the Orthodox family, ecclesiastical maturity, first and foremost, but also at an interreligious level, a dimension of its universality as an occasion for education, self-awareness, and theological reflection, aiming for the dialogue that will not be merely symbolic but substantial, redemptive, human, and reconciliatory between states. The legacy of the Holocaust in its ethical and bioethical aspect within the religious dialogue is the point that can constitute an unshakable unifying bridge between peoples in a way that transcends political circumstances. The memory of the Holocaust remains alive not only as historical testimony, but as a moral compass for the contemporary world. Holocaust education is often limited to a narrow historical approach, thus losing its broader pedagogical and interreligious significance. What I am attempting to highlight is precisely this dimension, how the Holocaust serves as a cornerstone for a fruitful interreligious dialogue. For this reason, allow me to briefly present two milestones in the history of this dialogue that are not taken into account. They concern the beginning of modern interreligious dialogue, which has been long and contradictory. An early but defining milestone in recent history was the Council of Constantinople in 1872, which condemned ethnophiletism, that is, the identification of the Church with national identity as contrary to the universal mission and Catholicity of the Church. The result of this considered stance for the Christian world was the official proclamation of an ecclesiological principle according to which the Church cannot be defined by national or racial criteria, but is called to transcend every dividing line of a political character when it refers to a human whom it transforms exclusively into a citizen of its realm and to function as a spiritual community open to all people. Subsequently, another important milestone in an early phase was the World's Columbian Exposition held in 1893 in Chicago on the occasion of the 400th anniversary of the discovery of America. It hosted the World Parliament of Religions, to which many representatives of the country's various religions were invited and constituting the first organized effort of representatives of different religions to sit at the same table and engage in equal dialogue. Although primarily symbolic, it opened a new perspective that was destined to mature over these years. The antisemitism that culminated in the Holocaust did not appear suddenly in the 20th century. Nazi Germany did not originate antisemitism. Unfortunately, it found fertile ground in age-old prejudices, theological distortions, and later rhetoric that had already been established since the Mid-Ages. Christian Europe had not always risen to the occasion in terms of defending its Jewish fellow citizens. On the contrary, it often reinforced or silently tolerated narratives that presented the Jew as a scapegoat. A characteristic example is Martin Luther's work on the Jews and their lies, written in 1543, in which extreme characterization and incitements to violence against Jews are recorded. This text, unfortunately, formed part of intellectual infrastructure that was utilized centuries later by Nazi propaganda to justify the marginalization and extermination of the Jewish population. The societies of the time, even when they did not actively participate, did not react adequately. Silence, indifference, or even mockery of Jewish identity functioned as the substrate upon which the rhetoric of hatred could be established. As is rightly observed, many times violence does not start from mass acts, but from seemingly innocent prejudices that gradually swell into institutionalized inhumanity. The Orthodox Church, despite its historical weaknesses and missteps, holds a unique position to function as a bridge between the Abrahamic religions. Orthodoxy has historically resisted antisemitism. In 1872, the Council of Constantinople, with its synodical condemnation of the confusion between church and nation, established the concept that national or racial criteria should not be taken as dividing criteria of believers. This was a pioneering position that theologically reinforced both the universality of the faith and spiritual unity, as well as interculturality, albeit addressed to members of a religious confession. Racial and national differences, like linguistic diversity, are subordinated to the unity of faith. As ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew has characteristically pointed out, this unity is not based on external factors, but on the basis of spiritual content, forming a discourse that transcends borders and cultural distinctions. This is a transcendent unity, but tangible consequences as it places obstacles to ethnic and religious exclusion. The Orthodox Church also has long experience from historical coexistence, either from a position of political power or subjugation with Islam, and a centuries-long journey with Judaism. Consequently, it has experientially managed otherness and its presence in various cultural environments and from any approaches. It can substantially enrich the contemporary discussion or interculturality, explaining it not as an obstacle, but as a challenge for unity through interaction and freedom. Particularly, the conciliatory discourse of Patriarch Gennadius Scholarius, who was subject to Islam, constitutes a valuable guide for a contemporary interreligious dialogue free from egoism. Interculturality, when not perceived as a loss of particularity, but as an opportunity to meet with other children of God, can function as a substantial tool in the effort for reconciliation and dialogue between peoples and religions. The experience of the Orthodox Church teaches that whenever unity has been achieved, this was not achieved through the elimination of differences, but through mutual understanding, respect, and a decision to coexist. In this spirit, interreligious dialogue can and should be seen as a common spiritual testimony of all and an act of hope. The Orthodox Church, which preserves in its tradition the qualitative details of this relationship that has developed over the centuries, bears and must assume the responsibility not only to participate, but also to inspire such meetings. In today's context, it must cultivate a stance of dialogue that will be based more on the advocacy of common ethical principles and standards, and the Holocaust constitutes a significant connecting link. The Holocaust was not merely an event of mass extermination. It was also a profound rupture in the ethical foundation of the Western civilization. Nazi ideology transformed science, and especially medicine, into a tool of death, using techniques of experimentation on human beings with specific ethno-religious characteristics without consent, brutally violating the concept of human dignity. Medicine no longer served for healing, but to serve the ideology of racial cleansing and eugenics. This transformation of science into an instrument of ideology highlighted in a horrific way the need for an ethical foundation of scientific practice. Bioethics, as a contemporary field of thought, was literally born from the ashes of Auschwitz, with the Nuremberg Code 1947 establishing principles that are today considered self-evident. The free and informed consent of patients, respect for human life, and the avoidance of any action that may cause irreparable harm. This code is a historical milestone because it reestablished a relationship between science and human beings with a focus on ethical responsibility rather than utilitarian logic. The barbarity of the crimes against the Jewish people, the inhuman experiments in the concentration camps, and the use of science as a means of extermination are monuments to a moral collapse that must not be repeated. The memory of the Holocaust is a constant moral call to protect humans from any form of instrumental use, from any attempt to degrade their value. The realization of the atrocities committed in the name of the science and with the tacit complicity of social institutions also obliges interreligious communities to reconsider their position. Just as science must be limited by principles, so too must religion function as a voice defending human value. This means that religious communities should reassess their relationship with the state. On the other hand, the degree of influence of state power on them must be made conscious and based on the experience of the Holocaust and the silence or failures of religious leaders with Hitler and his organs. The point of legitimate contact with Caesar must be delineated, as well as the dividing point, so that do not become easy tools for exclusion or imposition of a political ideology that does not recognize its citizens as persons, but as bounded characteristics. The moral legacy as a dimension of the Holocaust therefore concerns everyone. The doctor as much as the theologian, the teacher as much as the politician, the rabbi, the bishop, the imam. It calls us to preserve memory, not only to remember, but to form an ethos that protects the most precious good, the human as person. Today, where intelligent technology tends to alienate the individual from their body, and where biomedical developments pose new dilemmas, to remembrance of the Holocaust becomes a beacon of orientation. We cannot speak of progress if there is not foundation of holistic respect for the other. From their inherent value, whether in a fully functioning body or in states of diminished consciousness to their bones in death, from personal consist to the recognition of collective responsibility. The religious dialogue can contribute substantially to this discussion as well, by highlighting the common value of human life, a value that transcends internal dogmatic differences, and by recognizing that the rejection of the other begins where moral sensitivity ceases to exist. The ethical dimension of the Holocaust is ultimately also a theological dimension because it concerns our relationship with the other as a bearer of the same sacred value that exists in every human being. The timeless experience of the Orthodox Church offers valuable lessons for cultivating a substantial dialogue between religious and the contemporary era, which today constitutes not only a theological need, but also a social and humanitarian imperative. In historical periods where Christians found themselves coexisting with other faiths under different political and cultural regimes, approaches were developed that allow for the development of a dialogue based on a mutual respect and recognition of the dignity of the other. In this spirit, it has been found that the ideal spark of dialogue starts from common ethical values and the need for peaceful coexistence. The use of familiar concepts, already in 1454 by Patriarch Gennadius Scholarius, such as justice, virtue, and common responsibility towards humanity, can create a stable foundation of mutual understanding without altering identities or traditions. It presupposes excuse me, a sincere disposition for understanding without hypocrisy or pretextual approaches. It does not silence differences, but expresses them with courtesy, courage, and respect, seeking the common humanistic places that can constitute bridges of communication and cooperation. The religious theological tradition can not through imposition or hegemony, but as a voice that respects otherness, recognize the unique historical memory of others. Two questions acquire particular importance in this context. First, in that way, and following what practices did we coexist peacefully despite our theological differences? And second, what can we pursue together to enhance human well-being and harmonious coexistence even in situations of political hostility? The answer must not only be theoretical, it must also be practical, as the religious dialogue has a duty to be a dynamic tool for preventing hatred and promoting the coexistence of God's creations above national interests. The religious dialogue becomes substantial when it translates into joint actions, initiative of education and memory, collaboration that honor the past and promote peace. Especially today, when antisemitism is dangerously reviving, dialogue must also include the commitment to combat every form of prejudice with respect for the memory of the Holocaust as a global ethical legacy. In this context, instead of an epilogue, I present some proposals that can enhance substantial interreligious dialogue. If one expects the undertaking of collective initiative of the at the pan-Orthodox level, due to the organizational structure of the Church, they are under an illusion. The initiative must come from a hand of a local church. The Ecumenical Patriarchate has already moved with exceptional consistency in this direction. I can only mention the signing of the Carta Ecumenica in 2001 with a symbolic embrace of Judaism and Islam that live in traditional Christian Europe, and the visit of the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew in 2014 to Yad Vashem and his moving speech about the duty against the evil of silence. Second, internal education about the Holocaust and the ethical values it protects must be integrated both in religious schools and in a broader religious framework. The Holocaust does not concern only the Jewish people. It constitutes a universal trauma. It is not only a historical event, it is a moral challenge and a spiritual legacy. Theological schools can integrate courses, programs, and even visits to Holocaust museums, connecting memory with action and knowledge with empathy. Holocaust education is not a matter of historical knowledge, but a moral vigilance that can function as a basis for reflection on human dignity, racism, and the importance of resistance to injustice. The joint writing of a book that refers to the ethical dimension of the Holocaust for all three religions, with the aim of becoming a common text for the theological education of future leaders and theologians of the Abrahamic religions, would significantly contribute to the mitigation of reservations and peaceful approach. Interreligious dialogue is not only about the exchange of ideas, but also about cooperation through actions. The Dialogue of Hands model, as developed in the World Council of Churches, proposes the shift from abstract theoretical discourse to practical action. It is based on the belief that mutual understanding and trust are not built only with words, but mainly through common initiatives, common work, and offering to the other. This model has particular importance in the post-Holocaust reality, where the remembrance of pain requires acts of reconciliation and common responsibility. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, as well as other religious communities, can meet in actions of social solidarity, care for the vulnerable, support for education, and preservation of memory. The Dialogue of Hands builds trust through acts of solidarity and hand offering. It does not set aside theological discourse, but supports it with the truth of action. In an era where words are abundant and antisemitism is increasing, cooperation through action becomes the strongest channel of communication. The hand that reaches out to the other becomes a symbol of hope, reconciliation, and new beginning. Finally, I would like to recall a point already mentioned at this conference, that insofar as the religious dialogue progresses, that to the extent that the religious dialogue progresses, at some point all Abrahamic religions must critically re-examine their texts that have been used to justify hatred or violence. And since we are talking about a common heritage, I would say that it would be a blessing for this to be realized by the religious scholarly committees. Theological self-criticism, after all, does not mean loss of identity. It is, on the contrary, an expression of spiritual maturity. Christian theology has already taken this step when, after the Holocaust, it was forced to re-examine its anti-Jewish rhetoric, which contributed to it. The practical acknowledgement of the mistakes of the Orthodox Church can serve as an example for Islam to emulate and become a springboard for restarting the dialogue with honesty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father, for your challenging paper. Liz Albert, you're on with your question.
Hi, thank you for such a wonderful panel. I really was enriched by everyone's presentations. And I was wondering what sort of the concept of orthodoxy, or orthodoxy's sort of self-definition as the church of the first seven councils. Is it in some ways problematic in the relationship to biblical Israel? There seems to be a fundamental problem when we consider our tradition so embedded as it is in Greek language and philosophical terms and culture as a sort of the defining moment of Christianity, rather than a tradition that took shape at a particular moment in the continuum of Christianity. So, or a continuum of Christian history. So it seems we almost have a sort of an internal cultural historical supersessionism that doesn't even need a formal doctrine. I don't know if anyone cares to respond.
Father Jeffrey, would you like to respond to this?
I thought you might ask me. Yeah, I mean, Liesl, I really respect that question. I think it gets to the heart of some of what I was driving at. Orthodox have not been historically noted for humility, and I mean that, you know, not only with people who aren't Orthodox, but even among Orthodox. I mean, there's this whole thing that is a trope of, you know, there's old Rome and then new Rome, second Rome, and then Moscow claiming for itself being third Rome. I mean, all that is supersessionism, right? And that kind of thing is just written into our history, into our cultural definitions of ourselves, and it hasn't served us particularly well. I mean, our best instincts are actually rather ecumenical and outgoing and humble. Even there was reference today to World Council of Churches. I mean, who remembers that that was actually an initiative initially of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, writing out to all the churches of the world to have something like a League of Nations equivalent amongst the churches. And at our very best, we are more humble and open, you know, to others, but at our worst, you know, there's a kind of inbuilt supersessionism, you know, in multiple, you know, ways. And that includes what you're talking about, you know, in the kind of Hellenism of the ecumenical councils, which seems to supersede a more biblical Semitic, you know, approach to faith identity and so forth. And I don't exactly know how we properly get over that, except to spend, I mean, this is kind of hinted at in that last presentation, which I really appreciated, spend more time with others, right? To learn from others and to know that we're not the only kids on the block, and you know, we're actually rather less impressive than we sometimes think that we are, you know, as the kind of holders of all truth and all grace, and you know, just doling that out carefully over the wall that we've erected around ourselves. I mean, it's a psychological, social, cultural phenomenon as much as it's theological. But I mean, certainly in my own work and practice, I'm working on this with my people, with myself. But as a larger phenomenon, it's, you know, it's probably right at the forefront of what's stopping a lot of this from actually getting any traction. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Father Jeffrey. I am going to ask a live rail question and probably call on Rabbi Sanmel to respond, or actually really anyone who wants to respond. I'm asking it because this has been this is sort of a natural, in some ways, a natural question that's on the mind of a lot of people these days, and has been asked me privately several times. And that is the question of the problem of the Orthodox and Jewish relations in the Holy Land post-Shoah. It's a very broad, it's a very, very broad question. It's being asked in various ways, not all of them I would care to repeat, but there is a question of the tension between the historical indigenous Orthodox population of the Holy Land and the you know, the post-Shoah resettlement. So I don't know if Rabbi David, if you would be willing to address it, or if anybody else wants to speak to it. Thank you.
Well, nothing like a non-controversial question.
I said fly rail.
Well, I think, you know, I think there are several pieces of it. I thought your phrase of about post-Shoah settlement, or what exactly was that the phrase that you used? Because you know, I mean, I think that you know, I think we have to distinguish on a number of levels. We need to distinguish between sort of the official relationships between the Jerusalem Patriarch and the government of Israel, you know, which is complicated. I would not want to have to do the balancing act or the tightrope act that the Patriarch has to do. There's also, I think, although this isn't, I think there's also tension between, I think, the indigenous Orthodox population and the Patriarch and the hierarchy, given that you know, many of them are Greek of origin, and the population tends to be Arab. That's I think that's a source of tension. You know, and then, you know, I think clearly we have issues with violence or at least hate speech and so forth, directed not only towards Orthodox but towards Christians in general, especially in Jerusalem. So, you know, and then of course there are also aspects of dialogue and relationship that are going on there. So it's a complex situation, depending on who you're talking about, and so forth, and who you're talking to. You know, I think and it is complex. So every year there is tension around how many worshipers are going to be able to get to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Christian sources claim that that people are being prevented from getting there. Israeli sources say, well, you know, we have to be concerned about crowd control. There's only one exit from the church. You know, whose narrative is there, and how performative is the complaints every year? Are they really complaints, or is this a way of standing up and showing a little bit of independence? And I'm saying this, you know, and I'm sitting, you know, in the United States. You know, there are, I think, people who I mean, for example, the Rossing Center in Jerusalem is involved in a lot of dialogue, including with the Orthodox community. So, you know, there is no unified, easy response to that question. I mean, if someone wants to, or if you or someone else would like to sort of stretch that out a bit, great, but I'm also watching the time.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Pantelis.
Hello, Christ is risen. Very
David.
glad to be with you. And thank you, Inka, for taking the initiative for this very important discussion, which is a difficult one, to be honest. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I would like to start with a question for the speaker from Serbia, but because you raised the issue of Holy Land and the local Orthodox or Christian population, yeah, I think we should use the appropriate terms about this difficult issue. And I'm sorry, but following the UN definition, there is a problem of occupation in East Jerusalem and in Gaza and the occupied territory. So the problem is that for decades already, the local Christian population is the victim of a double oppression. The one is from the Israeli occupation. In my opinion, I'm sorry for this is the appropriate term to use. And on the other hand, the local Christian population is the victim of a growing Islamist fundamentalism and Islamist oppression. Many times Christians leave the Holy Land, not only because the Israeli occupation, but also because of the Islamic pressure over them, over their everyday life, over their religious beliefs and practices. So this is a very difficult situation. This is a very sensitive situation. And going back to the discussion about superseding understandings and replacement theology, I would say that in order to really discuss this issue, we should start from discussing the theology of replacement. This is something we have not discussed in the Orthodox context. This is something Western Christian theologians discuss a lot, but it has not been discussed in our Orthodox context. But again, we should be very careful about this because, for example, in the Holy Land, this critique to replacement theology is not only rejected by Orthodox theologians, but it's also rejected by theologians of other traditions. And this means, to my understanding, that the problem is not only theological, but it's also cultural and political. In the difference to what happens in the West, where there is a clear distinction between what Western churches do about replacement theology and what the Orthodox Church does about replacement theology. In the Middle East, I think all Christian theologians are very critical to the critique to the replacement theology. So this is a kind of, this was as a kind of comment and as a kind of, for example, what about Father Maroudas's the last presentation, the last paper about the ethical concerns and the ethical lessons from the Holocaust? For example, what about ethical lessons from the Holocaust? On the one hand, regarding a certain, to be clear, a certain Orthodox inertia about remembering the Holocaust and confessing our responsibilities. But on the other side, what about ethical lessons from the Holocaust regarding, for example, what is happening today in Gaza? And my question for the Serbian presenter, I would like to ask a question about Jasenovac, which is a very sensitive issue for Serbian Orthodoxy. And I would like to ask two questions. The one is, do you agree that with the number mentioned usually by the Serbian Orthodox Church that in Jasenovac perished 700,000 Orthodox Serbs? Or do you think that this is an exaggerated estimation? And the second question, when we are speaking about Jasenovac in the Serbian context, is there any connection of the Jasenovac with the Holocaust, with the extermination of the Jewish people, or for the Serbian Orthodox, the Holocaust is mainly or just Jasenovac? So thank you for this opportunity of discussion, and thank you for your answers.
Thank you so much for your question. I apologize, my daughter is probably in the background screaming, but unfortunately I can't do anything about it at this moment. Yes, so the question has two sorry. The question has two aspects. First, whether or not the number of perished is as high as the sort of the top answer that I was that you mentioned. 700,000 perished in Jasenovec were used in socialism as sort of the accepted number. However, there have been calls to place the number at a lower estimate. Obviously, there is no definitive answer. The Jasenovec Memorial Museum has a list of names of those that are 100% confirmed to be murdered there. And it's now, it's constantly updated on the website. Now it's, I think, around 103,000-4,000, if I'm not mistaken. So that is basically the lowest number that it could be. The highest number is very hard to guess. And also there is something, I think, morally quite problematic with this sort of haggling with how many people perished. Obviously, the number is very much disputed because of the ongoing Serbian-Croatian conflicts and the situation today after the wars of the 90s, etc., where both sides sort of have quite different opinions on what even transpired there. So it's also, the number is probably lower than the, sort of it should be accepted that the number is somewhere between sort of the highest estimates of 700,000 and the lowest estimates of about the, I mean, the lowest number is not even an estimate, it's a number, it's a list of 100,000. So it's hard for me to tell. And I really don't want to be in the sort of business of speculating with people's lives because I think it's quite a morally unjust thing to do. Also, now for the second question is regarding, if I understood correctly, is whether Holocaust is remembered in Serbia purely through the lens of Jasenovac.
Yes.
Is that and the genocide? All right. So two things that are really important to note: Jews within the post-Yugoslav, the Jews and the Holocaust in Yugoslavia was done in two quite different ways by two types of perpetrators. You had the Nazis, the Germans, which were the majority, and then you had the Croatian Ustašas, the Croatian fascists that did it. So the Holocaust in Serbia is remembered both because the Holocaust in Serbia proper was carried out exclusively by Germans. You had the extermination camps in Belgrade. Belgrade was one of the capitals that had 3 extermination camps for the local Jews. The German occupation of Serbia was incredibly brutal, but there was never a genocide against Serbs, by the Germans. The Holocaust in Croatia is part of a much broader genocidal politics of the Ustaša regime, which are rooted not only in the Nazi desires and Nazi policies, but in rather the autochthonous wish to rid Croatia of its unwanted elements. So when we're thinking about the Holocaust in Serbia, we largely think of it as two separate sort of phenomena that have overlapping, but they're distinct. And our church, for example, did participate also with the Jasenovac has an Orthodox monastery as well, and it's has the local Serbian bishop Jovan is very active in sort of remembering the events of Jasenovac and Holocaust, but also we have memorials to those that perished in German extermination camps in Serbia, and they're part of a different sort of narrative, and they're the often those camps, for example, I'm sorry, I'm going perhaps too detailed, but often those camps were also places where Serbs perished as well. And there was a really big debate in contemporary Serbia whether or not you should commemorate the Jewish victims with Serbian victims in the camps such as Staro Sajmište, or whether this sort of taints the singularity of Holocaust. And there, even the local Jewish community was split, with the Rabbi of Belgrade supporting one side, which wanted a more communal, both Serbian and Jewish place of remembrance, and the Jewish leader of the Jewish, forgot what it's called, like something like a municipal organization of Jews, but a secular institution, was supported as a more singular, so a separate way of commemorating both Serbian and Jewish victim. At the end, the communal idea was successful, and today we have a memorial at the Sajmište concentration camp, which commemorates both Serbs and Jews that perished in that camp. Thank you, and sorry for once again for my daughter in the background.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Thank you.
Your daughter is no problem. Thank you very much for the answer. There's a question in the chat that is very interesting, and I have no idea who can answer it. It's from Deacon Michael Azar. To what degree has a primary interest in diplomatic relations with Israel and a shared anti-Arab Palestinian and/or anti-Muslim sentiment influenced the way that traditionally Orthodox countries have chosen to admit their past anti-Semitism and/or Holocaust complicity? I have to say, I think it's a very, very interesting question, considering that we have so many representatives from the Orthodox oikumena here. Does anybody feel like tackling this?
If I could maybe just offer perhaps a smidge of an answer to the
Go ahead,
in the Serbian case, for example, the Serbian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina is called the Republic of Srpska, which is sort of an autonomous part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and our local government there has been maintaining very close connections with Israel, especially after, and it's sort of obviously stemmed from the legacy of the Bosnian War and the mutual sort of I wouldn't say mutual distrust of Muslims, but you understand sort of the sentiment that has been outlined in the question. And over the last few years, there have been several initiatives which are Serbian and Israeli at joint commemoration of genocide and Holocaust. It doesn't revolve that much around Serbian acceptance for the responsibility for the Holocaust, because there's very little, almost nothing. And it's more of a sort of an attempt to parlay the need for diplomatical ties and securing Israel's help during today's very tumultuous times in Bosnia, and to parlay that into some sort of a cultural cooperation, and then the Holocaust is a very convenient way to, and it's sort of express common solidarity. So this is a little thing which is more so in the Serbian area of Bosnia and Herzegovina rather than in Serbia proper, which has also very good ties to some Palestine as well.
Thank you very much.
Just to correct a little bit this kind of Orthodox attitude, which the anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, which was not unanimous. Just to remind you that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even beyond, for example, an Orthodox country like Greece was very much pro-Palestinian. So things are much more complicated, and we should be really careful about this. This is not exactly, this is not so simple to analyze the whole the whole Orthodox picture. And also, in order to describe, in order to explain the current Greek pro-Israeli position, we should also give many elements of for the analysis. I stop here.
Thank you. I think we can have that. This is such a fascinating question, and I think we could have this conversation ongoing. But I would love to move on to Lena Zizulin, who has a question for Olga Meyerson.
Right. Thank you, Inga. So I'm very interested in the changes to the Good Friday and Holy Week texts. And in some cases, I've seen situations where people just change the word Jew or Pharisee and replace it with lawless men. Is that enough? Are you saying that a wholesale revision of all of the text should be done?
Well, I think, first of all, the lawless man by now became kind of a reference to the Jews anyway, which is sort of paradoxical, because to begin with, of course, the expression is an oxymoron, since the Jews are the people of the law. And if you treat it properly, for example, what I suggested to the current choir director of my husband, and too far to be responsible for it, is that it was the expression, the lawless people of the law. In other words, if you define, if you want to keep the irony, it's important to say that they kind of betray not only Christ, but their own Jewishness. And I think that the oxymoron could convey it in some cases. In other cases, it is more obvious. I think it's quite obvious with personal pronouns in English. In Slavonic, for example, just as in Greek, it would also be the matter of the conjugation of the actual verbs, because in the aorist, they have the person. Unlike the Russian, the Russian or the English, for that matter, which doesn't have conjugated verbs anyway at all. But with the epithets, it's a little bit more complex, because you could encounter them in the invectives of the Hebrew prophets themselves. So, I mean, it's very common amongst prophets like Jeremiah or Hosea, even more so, to call, to have invectives against the betrayal of the law and of God's laws amongst the Jews. But the difference is that it's always internal. While here we have a very strong sense of dissociation, and that is what gives me a sense of the theologically wrong anti-Semitism. It's anti-Judaism in the sense of kind of Marcionism, I don't know, of a real lack of understanding of our own or Christian Orthodox roots.
So should they just be referred to as evil men?
No. I think it's important to really stress, if you keep those verses or those tichera, it's important to keep the controversy in. That's why an oxymoron would do. For example, if you have an expression like Иудеи неблагодарны, it's the same problem, because the word Jew, Yehudi, means the one thanking or confessing God. They say it's a cognate of the word toda, which means thank you. Or give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. It uses the same root in the imperative of the verb, etc. So you could say the people of thanksgiving who turned graceless, or who turned thankless. It's important, if you keep the expression or the epithet, it's important to keep the controversy, to drive it back home. But it takes tons of work. Usually, it sounds very good when we have the hymns themselves avoiding the personal pronouns, like the 15th antiphon. Today is hanging on the tree the one who hang the earth upon the waters, etc. It's very beautiful, precisely because the paradox does not distinguish between us and them. So I think it's kind of an ad hoc enterprise, But by now, any epithet that does not specify this paradox indeed sounds to our ears as us versus them. So I decided for that reason to dwell mostly on either personal pronouns or the grammatical person and the conjugation of the verb, depending on the language.
Yeah, now I like you have read these verses many times myself out loud, and I've gotten to the point now in my own development where I feel that even standing in church while somebody else reads them is complicity. So what do we do?
Same here. Yeah.
What do? We skip that service?
No, you skip the verse. I mean, it takes a lot of effort on the choir director's part, which I used to be one, or the reader's part, to weed that stuff out. In case it's untransformable, weed it out altogether, but it doesn't mean that you skip the service, because alongside that, you have fascinating hymns of compassion and fascinating, like, you know, the wife's thief or the 15th antiphon, or you cannot just, you know, pour the water out with the, the baby out of the water, because the fact that most of the compilers of these verses were kind of schizophrenic about their own identity in relation to the Jews, in no way cancels out our duty to commiserate with Christ, to be present at his cross. But however, it's symptomatic that a lot of my husband's Jewish parishioners, originally Jewish, I mean, by blood or by affiliation, etc., would skip the service altogether. And I think it's important, therefore, to reform it very radically, because otherwise it's too much of a waste of liturgical beauty as well. So it takes a lot of critical thinking, in short. And we shouldn't treat those things as dogma. You know, I really stick to Paul Mindor's claim that the greatest tragedy, for example, of the Russian schism in 17th century occurred from the fact that in the Russian mind there was no difference between liturgical practices and dogma. But just as with poetry, you know, it's if we approach it critically, we take out what's unacceptable, and we see the beauty of the same poetics in what actually manages to get things across.
So is there a good revision out there in draft form?
Well, I used to be much happier with the revisions that here at St. Nicholas, Kevin Fritz did for the 12 gospel service per se. But because he was very much, by the way, under the influence of our Inga here. And she would probably insist on a more radical thing. But what concerns me was that I came back to the church the next afternoon for the Vespers of the Position of the Shroud, the Venus Plashinice. And lo and behold, those services in the music books were not edited, because it just happened that Kevin himself was previously had been still at work for that service in the afternoon. He wouldn't be off. That year he wasn't off because the Easter coincided. So, but he was there, and of course he was not the one directing, so he just out of obedience sang all of that stuff. And that's when I slammed the door and left, because I felt that I couldn't be complicit, as you said, Lena.
I'm sorry if I can just move on, because I see 3 hands and we're already half an hour late. Olga, I have to say I had no idea that I had such an influence on dear Kevin. For the future conference on the revisions to the text, I think that one of the things that I find very interesting and striking is how the tone changes from the vitriolic accusations of the first half of Holy Week to the lament of Holy Friday, to after the burial, to the sudden remembrance of the entire Old Testament legacy, the Jewish legacy of Christ in Holy Saturday. So I think
exactly,
the arc
because
is
the Jews
fascinating.
again become us. You know,
Exactly,
Saturday.
exactly. So the arc is very interesting. Anyway, let's thank you both, and let's move on. I know that Sharon had her hand up for a while, so I'm going to ask her to unmute.
Hi, thanks. I'll just took my camera off. So thank you, first of all of you. I just want you to know that I was literally in tears yesterday listening to how beautiful it was to hear the caring and the scholarship that goes into this. And I just want to ask, my main question is, I went to your website. I'm a professor of cross-cultural management, by the way. I went to your website and I didn't see a page about donations. And I feel like this good work needs to be elevated. There's so much polarization in the world right now and so much hate. And I feel like I would like to know what I can do. You know, there's if it's of any interest to anybody to create a donate page, Canada Helps page with, you know, specific things, like if there's liturgy things that could be updated, if there's training needs or etc. Sometimes having focus needs listed, it's a starting point. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Nazar?
Yes, I wanted to ask about any cooperation with the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and Messianic Jews in Israel. And is there a section for Jews who chose Orthodox Christian tradition within the Patriarchate of Jerusalem? Or is it all Greek and Arab, and there's no place for Hebrew Orthodox liturgy in Jerusalem under the auspices of Patriarchate of Jerusalem?
I would like to speak about the history of the question, because I don't know a situation for today, except for probably the same thing we do know, but I know what it used to be, so I would like to contribute a little bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I converted in Jerusalem in 1976, the end of the year, and we had a community. Well, actually, it was a little bit after I left, because before that, the Greeks were afraid of the Israeli anti-emission law. And then a little bit later, a couple of them surfaced. One of them was the rector of the Holy Sepulchre Seminary. His name was Aristarchos, and he served in Hebrew. My brother used to belong to the community then, and I asked him, what do you do when you fall short of the text? Because Levinson has translated the whole liturgy, John Chrysostom, into Hebrew. He said, well, whenever we fall short, we switch to Slavonic. Whenever he falls short, he switches into Greek. But basically, they could do services, and he went so far as to do a liturgy with them once a month on a Saturday, because Sunday is a work day in Israel. The other person who also came a little bit after me, his name was Father Kiprian, and he taught biblical archaeology at the Hebrew University, and he would also be afraid to surface when I lived there. But then he was completely fluent in Hebrew, and he would do it. What has happened since then is very interesting in one way. It became more kind of legitimate and legal, but it also became more split and somewhat sectarian. But here I would like to defer to Inga.
Well, I know of the parish that is in Jerusalem Patriarchate. The priest is from originally from Belarus. He's Jewish ethnically. He is the Orthodox priest, and he serves in Hebrew. And he, as far as I know, it is the only parish under Patriarchate of Jerusalem that is officially a Hebrew language parish. For anyone who is in Paris, he's a relatively frequent guest at Saint-Serge Theological Institute as a speaker on that particular topic. His name is Father Alexander Vinogradsky. That one is sort of, it's always held up by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem when somebody challenges the question. However, as far as I know, it's essentially the Greek tradition parish liturgically in Hebrew, and it is not the same story as the mission that has been undertaken in Israel after the war by a Catholic priest whose name just escaped me.
Daniel Rufeisen.
Daniel Rufeisen. It was a Catholic mission for the restoration of the Church of James, the brother of the Lord, as essentially a Templar worship style mission. So this is different. This is very by the book Orthodox. Thank you, Olga. And Kostis.
Thanks everybody for this very interesting conference. My question also goes to Olga Meyerson, because my observation in Greek churches, especially churches of the 17th, 18th century, is that there is a lot of iconography also having to do with the Jewish people, with the Old Testament, and even this small affiche we did for the promotion of the event comes from a Greek church. So you see that there is, I think, I totally agree with what you said, but there is also a tendency, tечение of a respect for Judaism as well in the church. I don't know if we should consider it, and really I don't know how things have changed in the passing of time. I mean, I know that this study of George Demakopoulos regarding the introduction of anti-Jewish verses in the Stichira in the 5th or 6th century. And for sure today nobody would paint the Star of David in some Greek church or some Orthodox church, but maybe in some centuries earlier this was a common practice. That's the observation.
Well, I was baptized by a Greek priest who was the graduate of Saint Serge in Jerusalem. And he was a classmate of my husband's at Saint Serge, so it was way back when. He unfortunately deceased now. He was, his name is Father Meliton, and he was a very, I still remember how, he was the only one who was not afraid to baptize me. I was an Israeli citizen. So the anti-mission law had been just fresh, and he would do it because when my future husband came there, it realized that they were classmates and lots of borders fell. He started trusting our community a little bit more. And I still remember what he told to my godmother when she said, we're about to bring a girl who happens to be Jewish. Aren't you afraid? And he said, aren't we all Jewish? And then I remember I was baptized at the Holy Cross monastery, which traditionally was Georgian, and then it switched to the Greeks, etc., and back and forth. When I came there, Father Meliton told me, "Okay, you have the royal doors open. Name the things the Old Testament temple had." He meant the menorah, the manna, receptacle, etc. And and then he showed me the icons, obviously, of the Hebrew prophets, and it was very important. Then he told me, his Russian was somewhat broken. I mean, he actually was more fluent in Church Slavonic for obvious reasons because of the censorship. But he told me in his broken Russian, all I want is for you to feel at home. I was extremely moved, especially because his eventual destiny was very complicated. I learned it from eventually from Jean Reneto, who belonged to the same generation. He told us he was ordained bishop by the Patriarch in Jerusalem and dispatched to Gaza. And his mission was excruciatingly difficult between the Palestinian Orthodox Christians and the dominating situation. Plus, of course, he was dispatched on the Israeli territory. So he was tormented. It took him about 3 years there. Then he retired, went to Greece, and soon died. So I just want to say that the personal expense people pay for being in between and everything for everybody is immense. But texts are another matter. As long as we treat them as completely untouchable, nothing is going to change.
I agree.
That was my point.
Yes, yes, that's very clear. I think everything should not be untouchable. It's not only
you know, there's a big difference between dogma, the
Yes.
sacraments, and the liturgical poetic tradition, which is a treasure trove as long as you're free about it. Well, I happen to be a disciple of Shmemana in this respect. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would say that, well, I completely agree with you, Olga, that the hymnody is probably the first and absolutely necessary step, and it really does need to be addressed as a priority because of its influence and even the subconsciousness.
Yeah, it's existential education. It's something.
Yeah, the hymns. I would say from a lifetime spent in the parish where all the hymnody is edited, that it does not. It certainly is not the only thing that needs to be addressed, because I was speaking with Liesl about it this morning, our entire canon, as in, the canon of the Orthodox Church, was formed very much in the struggle with Judaism. So you have to go back to the first centuries, to the 4th century, really, and the establishment of the canon, and really analyze how the books were chosen, how the entire narrative is being told. And this is way, way beyond the manageable thing of addressing hymnody.
I think my husband wants to say something, but before he does, very quickly, I want to say that this is his purview. That's what he is addressing it from the point of view of way back then.
Okay, Father Michael.
No, I just want to make one historical observation from the history of pogroms in Russia and Ukraine. They usually happen on Easter Day. Why, of all of a sudden, such a bright feast, the people decided to go and look for some kind of scapegoat?
Wasn't that on Holy Friday?
Hearing this, all these hymns from the Good Friday, so to say. It is paranoid to some extent that Easter celebration, Paschal celebration of resurrection, could produce such a reaction. But it was exactly, halted subconscious that spoke 2 or 3 days after, exactly in these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. I think that with this, we're going to wrap it up. We've went 45 minutes over, but it was just such an excellent conference and conversation. Of course, it is just the beginning. Everything is always just the beginning. So I would like to, first of all, thank all the presenters very much, especially for accommodating our schedule. We purposely wanted to do this in Bright Week because the hymnody of Holy Week is so fresh in everybody's mind.
Hence the pogroms as well. Their hymnody was also fresh in their minds.
Yes.
Well, that's just it. We wanted to prevent people going out on pogroms, so we thought we would lock you to your computer for the week.
Right. So thank you very much to everybody who helped us organize this conference, especially to Volos Academy that came out in force with 4 presenters. They are just the most reliable partner in any crime ever. And again, thank you very much. The recording of the conference will be available to everyone on the Orthodox Christians in Dialogue with the Jews, OCDJ website as well as on the Wheels YouTube channel. So wait for the announcement. And again, thank you all very, very much. And we will see you again, I'm sure.